Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program and we're studying Chapter 18 in our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled God's Creative Action, You Have Free Will. This is where I help you to understand this being of God and how you can have a relationship with this being and actually get to enlightenment, or you cannot have a relationship with this being and still get to enlightenment. Your enlightenment isn't determined by God, so therefore, depending on whether you would like to have a relationship with this being or not, you'll still be able to get to enlightenment. Oftentimes we've been taught various misunderstandings related to this being, and if that's the case, then these things can actually hinder you from being able to not only have a wonderful relationship with this being, but also by getting to enlightenment, that it can hinder you from actually being able to experience the enlightened mental state. So I'm going to clarify all these things for you in our class today. We're even going to be discussing Gotama Buddha's teachings around God, because oftentimes people think that the Buddha denied the existence of God or that he rejected God, but this isn't actually true. So I'm going to help you guys to be able to understand this, how to either get to enlightenment with a relationship with God or without one. And of course, we're going to start our class with a meditation. So if you'd like to join for meditation, you're welcome to. I'll ease us into meditation with some chanting, and then afterwards I'll come back in with some guidance, and then we'll come out of the meditation with some chanting as well. And then of course there's going to be that period of time where we're just meditating together. So welcome, and I invite you to join for meditation if you'd like, as well as join for the chanting as we ease into the meditation. Arahang Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Abhivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti Pisu Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang sammuno สคาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสตาตาวามนุสนัง พุทโธ ภะคะวะติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, in the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมะคะวะโพตังมะคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาดัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังโพโตภะคะวะติ Okay, if you would like to slowly ease your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you. Welcome to everyone who's joining us here online through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or perhaps you're listening to this on the replay. Welcome to everyone. Today's class is all about helping you to understand this being of God and how you can have a relationship with this being if you'd like to, and how to do that in a healthy and wholesome way so that it can actually be a beneficial relationship, or that you can not have a relationship with this being. In either way, you can still get to enlightenment. Oftentimes, there's a lot of misunderstandings about the teachings of the Buddha around this being of God. You might see anything from the Buddha didn't teach about God, to the Buddha denied the existence of God, all the way to the point where some people will say the Buddha rejected God. And this just isn't actually true. And this is unfortunate because these individuals just haven't studied the original teachings of the Buddha to be able to see that he actually did teach about this being of God. But what you're going to find is that the Buddha doesn't base his teachings in belief, and he doesn't put God as a central role in his teachings, because it's not God who determines whether you attain enlightenment or not. It's your decisions that determine that. So what he did is he put you at the center of his teachings, because it's you that needs to learn, grow, and develop in order to train your mind and eradicate the pollutions that are causing it to experience the unenlightened state, so that now you can experience enlightenment, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. But if you had this turbulent relationship with any being in your life, whether it's this being of God or your life partner, your children, your boss, if you have any kind of turbulent relationships like that where you just can't get along with people, this is because of what's going on within your own mind. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will be able to get along with everybody and anybody. Those people may not be able to get along with you. They might have certain cravings and expectations of things that they want from you. But in terms of your mind, you'll be able to be perfectly peaceful and content in all your relationships. But depending on what you've been taught in the past, you might not be able to do this with this being of God. So I'm going to walk you through helping you understand first some basic definitions of what this being is and how I describe this being. Then we're going to talk about some teachings that Gotama Buddha shared around the teachings of God. And then I'm going to move into sharing with you how to either have a relationship with this being or not have a relationship with this being. And as you guys know, as we go through our class, you're welcome to ask any and all questions. You can put that into the Facebook group, YouTube, or in Zoom in the comment section. And I'll be able to see that and I'll be able to answer your question during the class. Or if you're in Zoom, you have the added functionality of electronically raising your hand. I'll be able to see that, and then I can answer your questions for you and help you to understand this being of God. So first, some basic definitions. The way that I define this being of God, and the way that you'll see the Buddha describing this being as well, is the creator of the universe and source of all moral authority, the supreme being. In English, we refer to this being as God. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he referred to God as Brahma, or Great Brahma. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they believed in multiple gods, so they talked about these different gods, but he would frequently refer to the Great Brahma, or this God that we typically refer to in the English language. You might find in Muslim teachings that they will refer to this being as Allah. Some people refer to this being as all-knowing or all-powerful or omniscient or omnipotent. This is the supreme being that is able to do anything, know anything, and has all knowledge and all power. And we refer to this being as God. Then what you might be asking yourself is, what is moral authority? Well, there's certain moral conduct that is wise to practice. And it's this natural laws of existence that help guide us to understanding the wisdom of what would lead to harmful results in the world and what would lead to unwholesome or wholesome results in the world, so that as we're making wise decisions or unwise decisions, we experience either wholesome results or unwholesome results. We refer to this as karma, unwholesome karma or wholesome karma. In this moral conduct or virtuous behavior that we're maintaining and we're acting upon these higher principles of proper conduct, this is based on the natural laws of existence. And with God being the creator, God is the one who created these natural laws. So he understands them inside and out. And we all have free will. And that's the way that this whole natural laws of existence and this path to enlightenment is all described, is that we have the ability to make any decisions that we would like. And based on the decisions that we make, we're going to experience either wholesome or unwholesome results. And you can see this to be true because, as you know, I teach students not to believe anything that I say or I write in books or that I teach in classes or anything that anybody else says. Instead, you need to be able to learn, to investigate the teachings, to reflect on those, to independently verify them, and to practice them. So when I say something like we all have free will, you shouldn't just accept that. You shouldn't just believe in that. You should be able to look at that, investigate it, and penetrate into it so that you know the truth for yourself, and now you have wisdom. And the way that you do this is you look at the decisions that you make and see, is God forcing you to make these decisions? Is there any being who's forcing you to have your hairstyle a certain way? The clothing that you're wearing, did anybody force you to wear that? The job or occupation that you might have or lack thereof, who chose that, right? Where you're living, or the fact that you're even in this class right now or listening to this replay. These are all decisions that you made. God didn't force you to do this or control you to do this. We all have free will. And you can see this to be the case when you look around at all the decisions that you're making. And when we experience unwholesome results in our life, oftentimes we look for somebody else to blame. But when we experience wholesome results, that's one we usually take credit for in the unenlightened state, right? Because that ego is in there and we want to take credit for all the wholesome things going on in our life. But when these unwholesome things are happening, oh no, that's somebody else's fault, right? And so it's important to see that we have free will, because it's not God who's controlling us. It's our own decisions that are leading to any particular result. God's not punishing us or rewarding us. It's our own decisions that are leading to any particular result. And depending on what you've been taught and where you've learned, that oftentimes people are learning about this being of God through the Christian teachings, and they don't necessarily realize that Jesus Christ actually taught the exact same thing. If you understand some of his teachings where he says, like, you reap what you sow, this is the natural law of Gotama. You reap what you sow is saying that whatever decisions you make, you're going to experience the results of that. That's what Jesus Christ was teaching. And he was teaching that we all have free will as well. And he was teaching a certain amount of moral conduct so that you could navigate this world better, right? He oftentimes casted it in terms of, honoring God or worshiping God or, these kinds of things, which we're going to talk more about. But the Buddha taught it in terms of what is going to lead to any particular results that you experience in life, and it's your decisions. And being able to see that you have free will is actually very freeing and very liberating. Because if you came from the perspective of everything that you experience is either good luck or bad luck or destiny or fate, or it's predetermined, that whatever you're experiencing in life has been predefined, then this is a defeating perspective. And you're not going to be able to go forward and get to enlightenment with that kind of perspective. Because if you think that God is controlling us, or that everything that you're experiencing is good luck or bad luck or destiny or fate or somehow predetermined, then why would you ever learn any kind of wisdom to improve your life and make wiser decisions if everything is happening because of other outside forces like God or predetermination or good luck or bad luck? You would have no ability with that kind of perspective to actually improve your life. But when you understand that you have free will and that everything you experience is a result of your decisions, then you can come to understand that if there's anything that you don't particularly care for in your life, all you need to do is cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and you will experience different results. But as long as we come from the perspective of this being is controlling us or punishing us and rewarding us, then we're not going to be able to cultivate the wisdom to make wise decisions and experience improved results in our life. So it's very important to see that we all have free will and to be able to cultivate the wisdom around that through learning, because I just gave you the intellectual understanding. I gave you an understanding of how to reflect on this and independently verify it. And now you can start practicing and realize that every time you make a decision, either wise or unwise, you're going to experience the results of that, either wholesome or unwholesome. As I mentioned, God doesn't grant enlightenment, and this is why you can either choose to have a relationship with this being or not. A practitioner attains enlightenment through their own decisions, their own choices, by making wise choices that lead to wholesome results, through practicing the teachings to train the mind, by uprooting those 10 fetters or those 10 pollutions in the mind. That's what's actually going to produce enlightenment, not God. God's not granting you enlightenment. So the Buddha absolutely taught about God, and you'll see in his teachings that he teaches about this being. But unfortunately, there's individuals who haven't studied those, and they might say that the Buddha never taught about God, or denied the existence of God, or rejected God. In fact, what the Buddha did is he did teach about God. He acknowledged God, and he did not reject God, but instead he taught people how to get to enlightenment with an understanding of God or without one. It was up to each individual to choose for themselves. So I'm going to help you accomplish the same thing. So in terms of the teachings of the Buddha related to God, he never denied the existence of God. He taught people how to attain enlightenment while having an understanding of this being. He discusses God in various locations because people had belief of God and multiple gods during his lifetime. But he didn't try to prove or disprove God's existence. This wasn't his objective. Instead, what the Buddha was doing was the Buddha was sharing teachings that lead to freedom from strong feelings, to liberation, to peace, to joy, to enlightenment. And those teachings that get to liberation or to enlightenment, they're not based on belief. It's based on independently verifiable truth in order to acquire wisdom. And since the Buddha didn't have anything to prove God's existence or disprove his existence, he just taught you about what this being is and how this being functions in the world. And then it's up to you whether or not you would like to actually have a relationship with this being or not. And because your enlightenment isn't based on that, you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to have a relationship with this being or not. Gotama Buddha focused practitioners' minds on liberation, on getting to enlightenment. And this is based on right view in the natural law of Gotama. Remember, right view is understanding the Four Noble Truths, the four aspects of those Four Noble Truths. What is the problem, which is discontentedness? the cause of that problem, which is craving, desire, attachment. That's what's causing the conditioned feelings. Then the elimination of that problem is accomplished through eliminating craving, desire, attachment. And the way that you eliminate craving, desire, attachment is through the Eightfold Path. That's the complete, perfect plan that's going to allow you to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment, where you can experience the peace and joy of the enlightened mind. And it's through cultivating wisdom, it's through training the mind, it's through eradicating these pollutions. So getting to enlightenment is not based on the creative actions of God. Because you have free will, it's your decisions that are leading to any particular result. Whether you get to enlightenment or not, it's coming from your decisions. It's not from anybody else's decisions. Here's a teaching from the Buddha about God. This is just one of many. And I share this with you because it helps to illustrate that you have free will. The Buddha is talking essentially about the same thing, but he's going into a lot of detail and explaining it to you. And you can see other teachings where the Buddha teaches about God too. So now you can see proof positive in the original Pali Canon. And there's the reference for you that you can go back and see this in the original Pali Canon, that the Buddha did indeed teach about God. So if you ever hear anybody that says that the Buddha didn't teach about God, you can just ignore it. And this is what the Buddha taught, is that when you ever hear someone, even an ordained practitioner, that is teaching something that is opposite of his teachings, he says you can just ignore that teaching and consider that this person has misunderstood his teachings. And you'll see this frequently, not just from average household practitioners on Facebook or Instagram, putting out quotes and stuff like this, but you'll even see ordained practitioners sometimes who are misunderstanding the teachings of the Buddha, that what they're teaching is in direct conflict with the discourses that the Buddha taught. And he said that, okay, when you see this, because he knew you were going to see it due to the universal truth of impermanence, is he said just ignore that teaching and consider that the person has misunderstood his teachings. So here you can see just one of many teachings where the Buddha shares about God. And by the time you get to volume 11 in the book series, you're going to see more than this about where the Buddha actually teaches about God. So I'll teach this to you. It's titled, All is Caused by God's Creative Action. Then, monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. And I said to them, is it true, you venerable ones, hold such a doctrine in view? When I ask them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, is it due to God's creative activity that you might destroy life, that you take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view? So I'm going to pause here and explain to you what's going on. That the Buddha came in contact with other people who were studying with other teachers, that oftentimes him and his students would walk down the street and they would accept donations of food and things like this. And then they would all kind of go to a certain park and they would sit down and they would kind of eat their food. And while they were there, they would conversate and they would have conversation. So the Buddha is asking certain other ascetics of other communities and Brahmin who are Hindu priests, he's asking them, hey, do you guys think that whatever you experience, whether it's pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, or painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, or neither painful nor pleasant like shyness or uncomfortableness, do you think that all that is caused by God's creative activity? And when he asks this to them and says, is this true? Is this what you guys think? They said, yes, that's exactly what we think. And then the Buddha replied to them. He said, well, is it because of God that you destroy life, that you steal, that you indulge in sexual activity, that you speak with lies, that you have argumentative speech, that you speak harshly, that you indulge in idle chatter, and that your mind's full of longing, which is craving, desire, attachment, that your mind has ill will, which is anger, hatred, and ill will, and you hold wrong view, which is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, not understanding that your own mind is causing your own discontentedness. So he's like, is it God that's causing all of this to occur, right? He says, then those who fall back on God's creative activity as an essential truth have no interest to do what should be done, and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded. They do not guard themselves, and even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. So what he's saying here is that if you think that God is controlling all of these things that we're experiencing in the world, then you don't have any interest to do what should be done or avoid doing what should not be done. And they're not making an effort to improve their life because they think that God's the one who's controlling everything. So they have no ability to improve their life. And because they don't apprehend as true and valid what should be done and what should not be done, the Buddha is saying they're muddle-minded, meaning their mind is lacking concentration. Because if you have pollution in your mind, you have these 10 fetters, then your mind is going to be muddled. You're going to lack concentration and clarity and focus. He says they do not guard themselves, meaning they're not practicing mindfulness to guard their mind and protect their mind to be able to take action and apply right effort when unwholesome thoughts are coming up, to be able to cut that off and let that go. He then even says the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. Being an aesthetic during the lifetime of the Buddha means you're on the path to enlightenment. Household practitioners would be on the path to enlightenment too, but oftentimes it was the ascetics who were making the most efforts to be able to get to enlightenment because they had the full ability in terms of their time of day to be able to devote 100% of their time to getting to enlightenment. Where household practitioners might have been on the path to enlightenment, but they were busy with kind of household duties just to sustain their life, like carrying water back and forth from the well, or acquiring food or clothing or other things like this. So an ascetic, somebody who's left the home, there should be on the path to enlightenment. And what the Buddha is saying is that if you think God is controlling everything around you, you can't even say that you're on the path to enlightenment because you're not actually being able to see the very first truth, which is the Four Noble Truths. You're not actually seeing the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, that what you experience in life is a result of your decisions. So this is the Buddha talking about how we essentially have free will, but he's going into a lot of detail to explain that. In terms of the Buddha's teachings around some of these topics that you might have been exposed to related to God, he has certain teachings that he declares throughout his life. His teachings in the Pali Canon, they're in those 45 volumes of books that are very, very thick. You'll see a litany of teachings that he shares in order to help people be able to get to enlightenment. But there's also points and times in his teachings where he's sharing his undeclared teachings. He says, remember, monks, what did I teach? I taught this. I taught what is discontentedness, the cause of discontentedness, the elimination of it, and the path forward. That's what I taught. And then he says, remember what I did not teach. I did not teach these things. These are my undeclared teachings. He didn't teach whether the world is eternal or whether the world is not eternal. And this means the universe, the entire world. He didn't teach whether it's eternal, meaning it's going to last forever, or whether it's going to come to an end at some point. He didn't teach whether the world is finite or infinite. Finite meaning there's a certain limit or barrier of how far the world goes, or that it's infinite, that it goes forever. He didn't teach whether the soul is the same as the body, or the soul is one thing and the body is something different. He actually didn't even teach about a soul at all because it conflicts with the universal truth of impermanence and the universal truth of non-self. So he didn't teach that there is a soul or there isn't a soul. And sometimes you will see people talking about a soul in reference to the teachings of the Buddha. And whenever you see that, you'll know that that's not actually what the Buddha taught because he left this as an undeclared teaching. Then he says, after death, the Tathagata exists. This is an undeclared teaching. After death, the Tathagata does not exist. After death, the Tathagata both exists and does not exist. After death, the Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. What the Tathagata is him. He referred to himself as the Tathagata. The word Tathagata, we think, means one who's discovered the truth or one who shares the truth. And the Buddha was a Tathagata. That's what he referred to himself. This is a way of referring to himself in the third person so he can disassociate with this personal existence view and thinking that this body or this mind is him. So if he refers to himself in the third person, it helps the mind to disassociate with this as being who you are. So what he's saying here, because he's enlightened, right? And anybody who's gotten to enlightenment is enlightened. What he's saying is after death, I'm not declaring whether an enlightened being exists or whether they do not exist. Because in some places you will hear people say that once you get to enlightenment and die, you're going to go to this wonderful afterlife in a certain place. Well, the Buddha doesn't teach that there is an existence after the person gets to enlightenment and dies. He does teach that if you don't get to enlightenment and die, you come back into the world in the cycle of rebirth. But if you get to enlightenment and die, he doesn't teach whether you exist or whether you don't exist. Because this is another thing that you will hear people say. Not only will some people say that once you get to enlightenment and die, you're going to go to this grand place, but instead some people even say once you get to enlightenment and die, you don't exist anymore at all. And you can see here in the words of the Buddha that he actually didn't say that. And you'll see this in the book series, and you can see where it links back to the Pali Canon, the original source teachings of the Buddha. So the Buddha never declared what happens next for an enlightened being. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you're not going to care what's next, because the teachings of the Buddha aren't about believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. It's not about getting to this grand afterlife. Instead, it's about learning now, reflecting now to independently verify the teachings, practicing now, and seeing the results now in this life, and getting to the point where your mind's utterly peaceful, utterly joyful, and you're not longing and yearning for some afterlife. So it's not believe, and hope something good happens when you die. It's about learning and training your mind now and experiencing the results now. So the Buddha didn't teach whether there is something next or there isn't something next. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's so peaceful and joyful, it's not going to matter to you. Because if there is something next, it's either as good as what you're currently experiencing or it's better. And if there isn't something next, well, so be it. So what? You're already peaceful and joyful in the present moment. It doesn't really matter. So these are some teachings from the Buddha around this topic of God and some of the things that people learn when they're learning about God. And I'm going to pause here and see what questions you guys might have so far before I move into sharing the teachings with you to help you understand how to either get to enlightenment with a relationship with this being of God or without a relationship with this being. So you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or in Zoom you can raise your hand electronically and ask any and all questions that you like. So I see some questions coming in here from Chris in Zoom. He says, if a person prays and asks God to guide them on the path to enlightenment with deep sincerity, what will happen? We'll talk about that next, Chris. The title of the section says, all is caused by God's creative action, but is all caused by God's creative action? No, that's the whole irony in this discourse, is the Buddha's teaching that that's not the case. So it's titled that way in order to be able to help you understand that it's not the case. But there's certain beings in the world that thinks that is the case. And I see you say that you're a bit confused based on the title, but God is not controlling what we experience. If God does not control everything around us, what does he do? We're going to talk about that here in a moment too, Chris. Arvind is asking the question, in some traditions, they hold that God is not just a personal being, but the total source of all things. Brahma I can't pronounce that word, but I think that has to do with Hinduism, is the substratum of all things, or pure consciousness, and that we are also a part of that consciousness. But we are caught in the illusion that we are not, and that is called samsara, caught in duality and hence suffering. Yeah, the Buddha didn't teach that, and oftentimes when people have learned in other places and they mix all this in, it can get very confusing. And you might even hear people in Buddhist teachings starting to share these kinds of things. Because if someone's coming out of, say, Christianity or Hinduism or something else like that, and they start getting into the teachings of the Buddha, oftentimes their mind can be clouded and they kind of mix these things together. So if you're interested in getting to enlightenment based on the original teachings of the Buddha, I would encourage you guys to just look at those teachings and stick with those, because I know with 100% certainty that these teachings will lead to your enlightenment. So you're going to need to set some of these things aside and be able to see and test that these aren't actually true. Because if we are all part of this grand consciousness, where is the evidence of that? There's no evidence of that exists. So you'd like to be able to independently verify anything and everything that you see. And each part of the teachings of the Buddha can be verified. And that's why the Buddha didn't actually teach some of these things and left them as an undeclared teaching, because there isn't a way for you to independently verify these things. You can't verify whether the world is eternal or not eternal, because we're not to the end of the world if there is an end of the world, right? And whether it's finite or infinite. You can't verify whether a soul exists or whether it doesn't exist. You can't verify in the unenlightened state, once a being gets to enlightenment and dies, what happens next. You can't verify that. So that's one of the reasons why the Buddha leaves all these things as undeclared, because they're not independently verifiable. So you would like any kind of teachings that you learn to be independently verifiable, because then you can get to wisdom and you're not just believing something. And then Arvind asked, how similar, different is this from Buddhism? Okay, so I think I've answered that. So Chris asked more, why would Gotama Buddha choose to leave each of those undeclared teachings as undeclared? Okay, so I just answered that as well. And one of the things that he was asking, or that I suggest that the reason why he left these undeclared, like the one about what happens to an enlightened being, if there is something next, which we don't know that there is, but let's just say there would be, and the Buddha knew about this, I would think that he would not describe that intentionally, because if there was this great, wonderful thing after enlightenment, that would just be one more thing that your mind's craving, and you wouldn't actually be able to get to enlightenment. You'd be stuck in this continuous loop that you'd be craving to get to this afterlife, but yet you can't get to it because you keep craving it, right? So you would need to eliminate any craving for it. Or he just might not have known what was next because he never experienced it. Oftentimes a Buddha will only teach whatever they experience, and the Buddha had never been enlightened and died before, so therefore he hadn't experienced it, so he may not have known what was next. Or he may have known that there is something next or there isn't something next, and he just wisely chose not to teach it. So it's best to just always think of this as an undeclared teaching, and all these others as well. Helena's asking a question. Follow up on Arvind's question. I think it's Gnostic tradition, which is something like early, I can't pronounce that word, Christian sect, teaches that we are all emanations of God who got entrapped in his own creation and forgot who he is. The purpose of our life would be to awaken to our true divine identity, God awakening through us. Any thoughts on this, please? Yeah, this just takes the mind down a path that can get very diluted and very complicated. And I suggest to set all that aside. You're going to hear, and you heard this morning, Helena, I think you were in class, where I was teaching about this at the temple, that you're going to hear how I describe this. I keep it very simple and very straightforward for you so that it doesn't get very convoluted and complex. Because the more things get convoluted and complex, the harder it is for the mind to understand and for the mind to actually practice. One of the things that Gotama Buddha did is he just kept things very simple and very straightforward. And that's what's actually going to be able to be learned and practiced by all beings and have a commonality of understanding to be able to understand the natural laws around us. And that's where we're able to independently verify. So that things like this get very complex and there isn't the ability to independently verify them. But what I share with you will help you to be either able to have a relationship with this being or not have a relationship and still get to enlightenment. Steve is asking a question here. Based on your understanding, was Jesus an Arahant? I would say no, that Jesus was not an Arahant, because Jesus said at the time of his death that I will come again. that this is rebirth. So Jesus knew that he wasn't enlightened, that he was going to need to be reborn and come back into the world again. And if you remember the teachings about Jesus, where he was in the temple and he got really angry about the vendors that were there, and he tossed over the tables and kicked them out of the temple, this is showing that there was still anger in the mind. And then at the time of death, when Jesus was on the cross and he cried out to God and he said, "God, why have you forsaken me?" In this moment, Jesus had some delusion or some unknowing of true reality. He thought that God is the one who chose for him to be crucified, where it wasn't God that actually did that. That was the result of decisions that were made. If you go into the temples here in Thailand and you start tossing people out of the temples and kicking over tables and stuff like that, see how long it takes before the police come and arrest you and put you in jail. Of course, they're not going to crucify you like they did in ancient times, but people are going to be pretty upset and they're going to try to stop this activity from occurring. So when Jesus was offered up of, would you like me to release Jesus, or would you like me to release this murderer? Well, this murderer had murdered a particular person, and maybe there was one family that was angry at that person. But Jesus had interacted with a lot of people, and a lot of people were rubbed the wrong way based on what he was doing. And when it was time to determine who got crucified, these people said, "Crucify Jesus. We would like him to die. He's the one who tossed over our tables and kicked us out of the temple," right? So this was the result of Jesus's decisions, but his teachings have that, where he says you reap what you sow. So he does understand that to a certain degree, but in the moment before death, he didn't understand, and he had that lack of wisdom. And you can imagine being out in the hot sun, being nailed up to a cross. Yeah, your mind's going to slip up if you're not enlightened, and you're going to misunderstand. And he was thinking that God was the one who was killing him, which was actually not the truth. And that's why he also said, "I will be reborn," because he wasn't yet enlightened and he needed to come back into the world and experience life again. Okay, let me see if we have any questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, looks like Janae has a question here. Is it disrespectful or rude to have a relationship with God purely for the benefit it can have to you? Let me think about this for a moment, because there's really, actually, let me think about this. There's actually mutual benefit here. You're benefiting from a relationship with God because you're experiencing guidance from God, but also God would like to see the world become a more wholesome place and a more kinder, more loving society. And this is benefiting him and helping him to be able to experience the things that he would like to experience. He doesn't have a craving or a desire for that to occur. So in my opinion, this is a mutually beneficial relationship, but obviously there's much more benefit on our side to have a relationship with this being. But this being doesn't want anything from you and doesn't expect anything from you. So you can have this relationship and experience this beneficial result of receiving guidance, but it doesn't mean that there isn't any benefit at all for God. It's just that what we can offer God is minimal compared to what he can offer us. Okay, we have a question coming in from Arvin. How do we explain certain miracles from prayers that people make to God? Many people testify to guidance healings. We're going to talk about prayer here in a moment. Let me talk about that when we get to that point. Is it wise to ask God for guidance, for wisdom and strength? I'm going to talk about that as well. So you guys are definitely headed in the direction that I'm headed in. So why don't we just go ahead and move in that direction? So now let's talk about what you can do in order to have a relationship with God if you would like to. But just understand that as I teach this to you, that it's not required to have a relationship with God in order to attain enlightenment. But also having a relationship with God won't hinder you either. Some people think that having a relationship with God would hinder you. But that's if you have the mindset and the conditioning that you grew up with, perhaps in other traditions. Because oftentimes people are taught to fear God. Sometimes people are taught to pray to God and ask God for all these different things. Some people are taught that God is punishing us and rewarding us. If you keep with some of this thinking in others, yeah, it would hinder you from being able to get to enlightenment. But what I'm here to help you with today is to break through all of that so that you can see that it's not required to have a relationship with God to get to enlightenment, but it also won't hinder you if you learn and understand and practice in the way that I'm going to share with you. The first thing as it relates to God is you need to have right view. You need to be able to understand and practice the Four Noble Truths, which includes the natural law of Gotama as part of right view. When we talk about establishing right view through the Four Noble Truths, it's understanding those four statements. But then there's something called accomplishment in view that you start to practice as you get closer and closer to the first stage of enlightenment. I teach this in the retreat in January, where I teach you everything to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, where you learn about accomplishment in view. And this includes understanding the natural law of Gotama of cause and effect. So if you went around thinking that it was God that was causing you to be angry and sad and frustrated, or these other discontent feelings, or you thought it was God that was controlling anything in your life, you're not having right view and you're not having accomplishment in view, and you wouldn't actually be able to get to enlightenment. So you're going to be able to need to see very clearly that what you experience in terms of feelings in your mind is coming from your own mind. It's not coming from God. And then you're going to need to eliminate any craving from the mind in relationship to God. Sometimes people are taught to pray to God and ask for things from God. You know, God, please give me a new car or more money or a new job or new friends, or please have my boyfriend or girlfriend come back to me. Or maybe your mom or dad is in the hospital and you're praying to God in order to save them. Well, if you have this craving and this longing and yearning and you're putting that into your prayer, if you don't experience what it is that your mind's wanting to experience, then you might attribute any anger that's coming up because you didn't get your cravings fulfilled. You might attribute that anger to God. And now that you're attributing that anger to God, you might push God away, thinking that, he doesn't love me because he didn't give me what I wanted. This is something that's very possible. It's the same thing with a friend or a family member. If you want them to be a certain way and they do what you want, you get happy. But if they don't do what you want, you get those painful feelings. And now you falsely attribute those painful feelings to your friend or family member. And with aversion, you push that person away thinking that you solved the problem. So people are doing the same thing with God, is that they're sitting down in prayer, they're having craving, desire, attachment, treating God like a genie in a bottle, asking for wishes. And if they perceive that God is actually giving them what they want, then they're all happy. But in another situation where they perceive that they're not getting what they want, then they get angry and they attribute that anger to God and they push God away, and now they have a turbulent relationship with God. So God isn't actually intervening on our behalf. People who say that they've been healed based on a miracle from God, this isn't actually true. What's actually producing any kind of results in our life is a result of our decisions. That if we're sick and we chose to sit at home and we just pray for God to heal us, this isn't going to result in a cure, right? The way that we get healed is through making wise decisions. Go seek professional medical help. Go to a hospital or a health center. Take medications or medical treatments or medical interventions. What happens is people might pray and pray and pray for somebody to get healed, for example. But now this person is at the hospital getting help. And now it's that help that actually led to their healing, but they're attributing it to God and to this prayer. So this is the mind's delusion or the lack of wisdom. So it's important to be able to see the truth on this topic, that it's not God that's intervening on these things. So if you sit down and you're constantly praying and wanting things from God, this is like treating God like a genie in a bottle. And if you can imagine being God and the billions of people in the world that pray to this being, can you imagine people constantly calling you on the phone and saying, hey, give me this, give me that, give me this, give me that. Can you give me this? Can you give me that? I want this, I want that. How long would it be before you decide not to be friends with that person anymore? Of course, God is there for you. God's never going to turn his back on you. He loves you regardless. But can you imagine being a being where people are just constantly bombarding you with requests and wanting things from you all the time? you probably would turn away from that individual after a while. Well, God doesn't do that because he has nothing but loving kindness and compassion for each and every one of us. But this just tells you the position that you're putting this being in, that you're just constantly might be asking for things and craving for things. This is your mind longing and yearning. And you need to be able to see the truth that anything that you experience in life is a result of your decisions. So when people are sitting down and they're praying over their food and they're thanking God for this food, it's not God that produced that food. It's their decisions that led to that food being acquired. And you can see that in every single aspect of your life, that God didn't get this food for you. God didn't get those clothes for you. God didn't get that jewelry or any other thing for you. These are results of your decisions. You reap what you sow. The natural law of Gotama, cause and effect. If you would like to pray, what I suggest you do in prayer is that you might say to God that you believe in him. Or you might say to God, I don't believe in you. I don't know whether you exist or not, right? No matter what you say. Or you might even say, I know that you exist. I have my own evidence that you exist. Because God does show up in people's life and give them ways to be able to see that he does exist. So you could pray in that way. And then let God know that you're open to his guidance. Anytime he would like to guide you, you're open to that. And then give thanks for this being to be in your life. This being isn't going to answer your prayers where like you're at a fork in a road, and this guidance that you might be looking for, it's not that you're at a fork in a road and you say, God, should I turn left or right? And God's going to say, turn left. Right? He's not like a GPS, right? He's not going to give you every single direction that you need. Instead, at whatever time, if you've opened up to a relationship with this being, at whatever time this being feels that it's important to provide you some wisdom or some guidance, you might receive that in your mind. It's almost like somebody's whispering in your ear. It's like somebody's inserted thoughts into your mind. It's always positive and uplifting. It's almost like grandfatherly advice. But you still need to learn, reflect, and practice, because you've got other beings out there that are doing unwholesome things that are also trying to influence you in unwholesome ways. And you would like to look at whatever's coming into your mind and determine whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. But God can guide you in various aspects of your life, but it's not every second and it's not on demand. It's when God knows that it's important and it's helpful, because you need to cultivate your own wisdom. He's not going to control you. He's not going to tell you every single thing that you need, because you still need to be actively developing your own practice along this path. You're going to need to eliminate any cravings, desires, attachments to be with God in heaven. If you have a longing, a yearning to be with God in heaven, like in an afterlife or something like this, you're going to need to eliminate that craving, because that's a longing, a yearning, and you're going to experience discontentedness as a result of it. And you're not going to be able to experience enlightenment if you have this craving to be with God in heaven. So if there's any attachment to God whatsoever, you're going to need to eliminate that, where you don't have this attachment. Because any kind of craving, desire, attachment to any being, not just God, but any being, it's going to produce discontentedness in your mind. And this is where people can have a turbulent relationship with this being, that they're attached, they're longing, they're yearning, they're expecting and wanting this being to be a certain way. And when they're not that way, they get angry and frustrated, and now they have a turbulent relationship with that being. Some additional things to keep in mind is that in terms of what you experience in life, it's the natural law of Gotama. It's cause and effect, or action and result. Oftentimes people think that God's controlling us, and this just isn't true. So you need to be able to see the natural law of Gotama very clearly, and that's what I'm helping you to be able to learn and understand as you're going through all the various programs and courses and retreats that I share, is helping you to awaken to the wisdom of this cause and effect, this natural law of Gotama, that it's not God that's producing any results in your life. If you've been taught to fear God, you're going to need to eliminate this fear. That's why I taught last week the chapter of eliminating fear, because you need to have all fear eliminated from the mind in order to get to enlightenment. An enlightened being doesn't have any fear. So if you've been taught to fear God, maybe you've been taught that God punishes us and rewards us. Maybe that you've been taught that God judges us at the end of our life and sends us to a good place or a bad place. You can see that this isn't true, because this being that is all-knowing and all-powerful and that has so much love and kindness, well, if you had a child, or if you don't have a child, just think about your mom or dad. Are you going to send your mom or dad to a good place or a bad place if they make one little mistake in their life, or two or three mistakes in their life? Are you going to send them to eternity to burn in hell? You love your parents. Would you do that to them? Well, of course not. This being of God is much wiser than any of us. This being of God is much more loving and kind than any of us. So if we wouldn't do that to one of our friends or family members, why would we think that this being would do that? It's not God that's sending us to any good place or bad place. It's not that we need to fear this being. Anything that we experience is a result of our decisions. So if you've been taught to fear this being because it's going to send you to a good place or a bad place, you can look at this and see that it's not true for yourself based on how you would interact with people in the world, that you wouldn't send people to burn for eternity in a place like hell. And by the way, these realms aren't actually permanent anyway. This is one of the misunderstandings in the world as well, that people think that these are permanent existences in these various realms. So if you've been taught to fear God, you're going to need to eliminate that fear. Because imagine if you had fear with any being whatsoever. Let's say you had a life partner that you were living with side by side, and you had fear of this being. Do you think you'd have a healthy relationship, that every single time you come home and they're there, you're kind of walking on eggshells and you're fearful around them? Or whenever you're at home and they come home, you're kind of fearful? How could you ever develop a wholesome and healthy relationship with any being, like a boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, if you have fear of this being? So this being that is all-knowing and all-powerful, they're not interested in you fearing them because they know that this would be problematic for your life. So while other people might have fear of this being because they fear based on the things that they're choosing to do in life, and they're teaching you to potentially fear this being, you don't need to fear this being, because this being isn't doing anything to you. This being isn't controlling you. This being isn't punishing you and rewarding you. The things that are doing that is your own decisions. If anything, you're punishing yourself through making unwise decisions. But what this path is all about is cultivating wisdom, making wise decisions, and experiencing improved results. So sometimes when I share this about God, people get to the point where they say, okay, well, if I'm not praying to God and asking God for stuff, God's not controlling me. God doesn't want me to fear him. I don't have to worship God. And, whatever I do it's my decisions that are leading to any particular results. Then what's the purpose of God? So someone might say, well, how do I understand this being now that you've kind of stripped away the things that I've been taught related to this being? Well, you might think about this being as a practitioner of these teachings, that because they created these natural laws, they fully understand them inside and out. And this being is enlightened. They fully have wisdom of all these natural laws. This being is a practitioner, a very, very deep practitioner of these teachings, and they're not attached to us. God is not attached to what we do or that we don't do. And he's not responsible to restrain us from the things that we experience in life. Oftentimes, if you see like a murder going on in a community, or you see like a rape or a child being abused, sometimes people think, how could this all-knowing, all-powerful being allow this to happen? Or how could this all-knowing, all-powerful being make this happen? Some people think that God is controlling what is happening in the world. Well, if you understand that God isn't controlling what's happening in the world, that this murder, this rape, this abuse of the child is happening based on decisions by individual people, based on the craving, anger, and ignorance in an individual's mind, they're choosing to murder. They're choosing to rape. They're choosing to abuse this child. And it's not up to God to restrain us from our own decisions, right? That if we were attached to an individual, you might try to restrain that person. Let's just say you have an infant child and they constantly keep going to the stove and they constantly keep trying to touch the hot stove. Well, initially, you're going to probably restrain them and pull them back and say, no, little David, don't touch the stove. It's going to hurt you, right? And you might do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times. This is what I did with my son, that when he was young, he kept trying to touch the stove and I kept pulling him back. And eventually, after a few times of doing that, I decided not to pull him back. I decided to let him get close to the stove. And when he got close to the stove and he felt the heat, he immediately pulled his hand back and he never touched the stove ever again, because he had wisdom at that point. Prior to that, he didn't have wisdom. He had craving, desire, attachment. He had longing, yearning. He wanted to touch this big box that was the stove. But then when he touched it, and he felt the heat, he cultivated wisdom. And at that point, he eliminated his craving. He no longer was interested in touching this stove whatsoever because he saw that it was an unwise decision. So that's the same thing that God's doing. As a wise parent, not being attached to us, he's allowing us to make whatever decisions we make. We have free will. If God was controlling us and restraining us in every aspect of our life, we wouldn't be interested to live in that kind of world. If you can imagine God controlling every last aspect of our life, that means we would be like robots and we would not enjoy this world whatsoever. So he's not attached to us, wanting us to be any particular way. This is one of the things that people are taught, that there's some grand plan that God has for every single being, and we need to fulfill that plan. This isn't true. That would be expectations. That would be longing, yearning. That would be trying to control somebody. This isn't what God does. He's not attached to us. We have our own free will, and God's not responsible to restrain us from our unwise decisions, because we need to cultivate wisdom in that situation. We need to be able to see the unfortunate circumstances that we end up in and the consequences of our decisions. And then through seeing those consequences, we can then learn from that and cultivate wisdom. The natural law of Gotama is the very best and most unbiased teacher that you will ever find. It's going to show you where you're making wise and unwise decisions, because you're going to experience wholesome results or unwholesome results. And if you look at this and cultivate wisdom around it, you'll be able to gradually awaken to enlightenment. And of course, you're going to need teachers and guides to help you through that, but you'll ultimately be able to cultivate wisdom. So this being is interested in seeing all beings live in harmony, but we need to be able to do that through acquiring wisdom. We're not going to get to harmony by God controlling us, or by somebody snapping their fingers and instantly the world becomes perfect. Instead, each individual being needs to cultivate wisdom, and as we all cultivate wisdom and eliminate pollutions of the mind, slowly but surely the world will become a more peaceful and loving society. So this is what I have to share with you about how to have a relationship with God. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you, if you're not interested in having a relationship with God whatsoever, how to do that. And then I'm going to open up to all questions that you have, because that's all I will have to share with you guys to this certain level of detail. But if you guys would like to go deeper, we can certainly go deeper. And if I haven't answered some of the questions from before, feel free to re-ask those again, and I'll go into those in more detail to help you. So if you're interested in having a relationship with God, what I've shared with you so far is going to help you get to that healthy, wholesome relationship. And there's other things that you might need to learn too, in terms of God doesn't have a predefined destiny for us, that it's up to us to make these decisions. You might have other things that you need to dive into, depending on what you've been taught, to be able to clarify that this being isn't controlling you. But if you're not interested in having a relationship with God at all, you can completely do that and not actually have any kind of difficulties or struggles, because you can still get to enlightenment without having a relationship with God. But depending on what your thoughts are about God right now, you are going to need to eliminate any anger, hatred, or ill will towards God. If you have any anger, hatred, or ill will towards God, you're going to need to eliminate that. And not just towards God, but any being. If you have an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend from 10 years ago and your mind's holding on to anger, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. You're going to need to let that go too. So any kind of anger, hatred, or ill will that's in your mind, that's still a pollution of mind, and it's going to hinder you from experiencing this permanent peace and this permanent joy. There's loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness in day-to-day life that is going to help you to liberate the mind from anger, hatred, and ill will. So if you have anger, hatred, ill will towards God, you're going to need to include that being at some point in your loving kindness meditation, and to develop a more loving and kind perspective of this being. And perhaps you don't even have any interest in even knowing whether this being exists or not. But if your mind is still holding on to any anger towards this being, you're going to need to eradicate that. So you're going to need to look inward, be introspective, and discover what is it that your current thoughts are about this being. And your thoughts might evolve over time. Right now, you might not be interested in having a relationship with this being, and that might be what you go forward with. But in the future, you might change your mind perhaps. Or right now, you might be interested in having a relationship with God, and you start walking down that path, and then you might change your mind later about that too. So whatever you decide, I'm here to help you, whether you decide to have a relationship with this being or not have a relationship with this being. But just like all beings, you're going to need to get to the point where you have loving kindness for all beings in the world, including this being of God. So now what I'm going to do is open up to any and all questions that you guys have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. I see Helena has her hand up. If you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. So how do you go about prayer? How do you contact God?
So as I was training my mind very closely, I would get into prayer on my knees. I happen to be in the way that my bed is situated. My head faces north, my feet face south, and when I kneel on the side of my bed, I happen to be facing east. So I face towards the east, and I get down on my knees. I do the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and I would talk to God, and I would just have conversations with this being and let them know that I know that they exist. Thank you for being in my life. I appreciate you being in my life. I'm here to do nothing but good. I would like to learn how to do that. I don't know how to do that. If you can guide me and help me, of course, I'm going to do work. I'm going to try to figure this out. But anytime you would like to help me, I'm here to receive your guidance. I just have a conversation with this being. And the thing is about this being already knows every single thing about the world, from the beginning of time all the way to the end. So this being already knows what's inside your mind. You can't trick this being. But instead, what my talking to this being was just to kind of get my thoughts out of my head. And then slowly but surely, as I built a relationship with this being and I saw this being helping me continuously throughout my life, I've ultimately got to a point where he's provided all the guidance that I need, or that I feel that I need. And I have a completely healthy relationship with this being. And all I do at this point is the Lord's Prayer. And I put at the very back of Volume 1 how I understand the Lord's Prayer. I put the Lord's Prayer in chapter 11, but I put my interpretation of this and what I suggest that this Lord's Prayer means in the glossary all the way in the back. And that's all I do anymore, because I know that this being knows me inside and out, backwards and forwards, just like he knows you as well. And if this being would like to contribute anything to my life, this being is going to do it, regardless of what I say, because I've already opened up to this being and let him know that I'm open to his guidance. So at this point, I don't even have to have any more further conversations with this being, because we just understand each other. And it's the same thing like with my wife. When we first got together for many, many years, we had lots of conversations. We had to figure out each other. We had to talk to each other. We had to figure out what perspective we were coming from. But at this point in our life, we don't sit down and have like in-depth conversations anymore, because we fully understand each other. It's just like, hey, Mom, what are you doing? Oh, you're going to go over there and get some food? Okay, well, I'm going to go over here and pick up our son. I'll see you when you get home, right? We just kind of like make things happen in our life because we're totally on the same wavelength, so to speak, in our relationship. And the same thing's true with this being of God, that I suggest that we're on the same wavelength. This being understands me. I understand this being, and all I'm doing in the Lord's Prayer is essentially affirming my interest to create heaven on earth here, and that I'm maintaining this relationship and letting God know that, hey, I acknowledge your existence and I'm here to do nothing but wholesome things.
Okay, so beautiful. And why did you decide to kneel?
Because I consider this being to be the supreme being, and I would like to show respect and gratitude and appreciation to this being. So being down on my knees, it allows me to maintain and cultivate that respect and that gratitude and that appreciation towards this being. Because if it wasn't for this being, I don't know where I would be today, probably dead. This being has helped me tremendously throughout my life.
Okay, and how do we know that we are actually interacting with God, the Creator, and not with just a very wise heavenly being?
The wisdom from God is going to be very deep and very profound. It's going to be something that you've never even crossed your mind before. It's something that completely new wisdom that hasn't ever entered into your mind. And typically when he's doing this, he will also kind of like send these sensations around the back of your head, down your neck, and across your shoulders. It's almost, I think we call those warm fuzzies. across the back of your shoulders. It's almost like he's touching you on the back of your head, and you feel this feeling and sensation over the back of your head, down your neck, and across your shoulders. He can share wisdom with you without that occurring, but oftentimes he will do that to kind of confirm that you're thinking in the right way. So the thought might come into your mind that he's giving you some kind of thought. You think about it for a moment, you come to a conclusion, and when you come to that conclusion, he's going to send those sensations in order to confirm that yes, you have understood that accurately.
Okay, and lastly, do you know, David, where God resided before he created the heavenly realm?
I don't know that at all. The Buddha talks about the beginning of the cycle of rebirth in terms of the time frame and how it was created and stuff like this. He does give a creation story, but in terms of like things like this would just be like speculation. We don't really actually know.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're very welcome. Okay, so we have some more questions coming in here. Chris is asking, is it possible to know that God exists, or is it only possible to believe? You can know with 100% certainty that God exists. In fact, people ask me sometimes, do you believe in God? And I say, no, absolutely. I don't believe in God at all. But I know that he exists with 100% certainty because he's shown me so much evidence of his existence all around me. And this is the way this being functions, that he doesn't tend to do things on a grand scale where people can independently verify his existence, but instead he's doing it in such a way that you on an individual level can see that he exists. But you can't take that thing and then go show it to somebody else and say, see, this is proving to you independently that God exists. The one thing that I point to help people independently verify this being's existence is the world itself. If you look at this world and how complex it is and how intricate it is and how, it has a sun and then it rains and then that rain falls down and it waters the plants and then it evaporates and goes back up into the sky and then there's oxygen that we breathe and all this complexity, do we really think like two unintelligent rocks hit together and then poof, created this wonderful world that we live in? No, there's definitely a being that has complete knowledge and complete wisdom to be able to create this intricate system. I mean, look at us even creating a car. A car is kind of an ecosystem to itself. The way one thing is dependent on another is dependent on another. It took us many years just to figure out how to create a car, right? So if you can imagine this particular world that we live in, the more you understand about the natural world and nature, you can see that two unintelligent rocks hitting together and exploding isn't going to just create everything that we experience in this world. Now, those two rocks could have hit together potentially, and this being also could have then initiated certain things to bring this world into existence. These two things can actually both have occurred at the same time. The Buddha does talk about a creation story, and he doesn't talk about two rocks hitting together, but he talks about other things. So the one thing that I can point to independently verify God's existence is look at the world around you. Look at the beauty. Look at the complexity. Look at how it's been created and how one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And that might be enough to help you be able to see that yes, there's a being that is all-knowing and all-powerful behind the creation of this world. But then on an individual level, if you open up to God and let God know that you're interested in his existence, you're interested in knowing whether he exists or not, at some point in your life, he may show up and do things to help you see his existence. He's not going to do it right away as soon as you ask for it. He's not like Netflix on demand or anything like that, right? But if you open up to him and you build a relationship with him, don't be surprised if over time there's certain things that he does to show you that he exists. Okay, so you can verify his existence, but it's not something you can independently give to somebody else for them to go. So like the miracles and things that he's done in my life, they're just things that I can tell you that he did and I saw with my own eyes, but you weren't there to be able to know that these things occurred, so you wouldn't be able to independently verify it. Arvind is asking, can one experience visions of God? Some mystics claim they experience unconditional love and mystical experiences of rapture and bliss from prayer, meditation on God. Is this in any way beneficial for enlightenment? Yes, this is something that God can do, but he's not going to do it on demand where you're asking for it, because there's a craving, desire, attachment there. But he can do things where you feel this unconditional love, and that's part of that sensation that I was talking about over your head, neck, and shoulders, that you can see that there's unconditional love there. Because as I mentioned, God has done amazing things, not only miracles and showing me different things, but the wisdom that he's given me has been profound. But at one time in my life, I was doing all kinds of unwholesome things. But yet this being was still there for me when I needed him most, and he never turned his back on me. There was this unconditional love that he had. Even though I did all these unwise things, he never turned his back on me. And you can experience that through God. And one of the miracles that I experienced was one of those experiences that someone might refer to as rapture. And this is something that I didn't ask for, that I didn't request, but it happened. So you can experience those kinds of things. Chris is asking some more questions. How can I determine if the thoughts inserted in my mind and what feels like divine inspiration is God versus another being, such as an afflicted spirit or hell being? So if it's God or a heavenly being, and this goes into Helena's question too, because I didn't answer this part of it. If it's God, it's going to be deep, profound wisdom that you've never even thought about before. It's like this grandfatherly advice. And when you think about it and you actually get to the point where you've confirmed it within your own mind, he'll oftentimes give you that little touch to help you see, like, aha, you've done it, right? You've figured it out. Heavenly beings, they have wisdom, and it's just like, these little tiny things here and there. It's helpful. It's definitely helpful. And they can also send some of those sensations across the back of the neck and the shoulders, but they're very minimal compared to the strength of these from God. They're very minimal compared to what he sends through the body. And as you become more aware of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and aware of the bodily sensations that we talk about with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you'll clue into these things that I'm talking about with God and these heavenly beings. Because remember, you can also have these hell beings and afflicted spirits. You can have Mara. When these beings are trying to influence you, whatever they're trying to insert into your mind, it's going to be unwholesome, it's going to be unwise. And that's why whatever's coming into your mind, you need to be able to independently verify whether it's true or false through your own wisdom. You're not believing anything that comes into your mind. You need to independently verify whether it's true or false. So if it's unwise, if it's unwholesome, it's coming from these beings. If it's wise and it's wholesome, it's coming from God or heavenly beings. And when Mara and these afflicted spirits and hell beings come to you, it's going to be very dark, very heavy energy that's coming in over the body or coming on the shoulders. It's going to be very dull and very heavy when it comes to you. And like I mentioned, it's going to be unwholesome things and unwise things. Chris is also asking, does God love all beings, including Mara, Satan, and other hell beings? So Mara and Satan are the same being, just referring to different names like God and Allah. And the answer is yes, God loves all beings. And it would be wise for you to do the same thing. And that's what you're going to need to do in order to be able to get to enlightenment. How does he relate and associate with such beings? These beings that are into unwholesome things, they don't tend to associate with God. If you can think about times in your darkness, if you've ever been into the deep darkness, like maybe you've potentially used drugs or alcohol, or maybe you've been into a lot of sexual misconduct. I don't know that that's true, Chris, but I'm just kind of throwing out examples out there that if you've ever been into that kind of darkness at any time in your life, probably the last thing you were thinking about was God, right? So the same thing is true with Mara and afflicted spirits and hell beings, beings that are into darkness, including human beings. Usually they're not even associating with this being God or even thinking about this being God. Was God instrumental in you gaining the wisdom and you achieving your level of self-development? Yes, absolutely. If it wasn't for this being, I wouldn't have been able to cultivate a lot of the wisdom that I shared today. Do you still do the Lord's Prayer based on your interpretation? Yes, I still say the Lord's Prayer the way Jesus Christ taught it, But what I'm explaining to you in the glossary of Volume 1 is how to understand that prayer and the meaning that it has for me. And you'll be able to see that, but I still recite it in the same way that Jesus taught it. Julia is asking a question. Thank you so much, Teacher David. In some Asian cultures, we believe in a personal spirit or God that protects you. Is God like the Buddha? Pause and talk there. God isn't protecting us, as you heard me share. He's not restraining us. He's not watching over us to ensure nothing bad happens to us. It's our own decisions that lead to any wholesome or unwholesome results. And is God like the Buddha? They are similar in terms of they're both interested in wholesomeness and they're both wise, but they're different. God is this all-knowing, all-powerful being. It's a formless being that has an enormous lifespan. The same length of time as the entire world. That's God's lifespan. Where a Buddha is a human being who doesn't have the same level of wisdom as God, and they're a human being. So their lifespan is quite finite in that, they might live 60, 80, 100 years. The last Buddha, he lived until he was 80 years old. And any future Buddha would potentially live to about that same amount of time or longer. So a human being is different than God. We human beings, we are not God. God is a completely different being than us human beings. But a Buddha and God are similar in that they both have deep wisdom and they both are interested in nothing but wholesomeness in the world. Julie is also asking, is praying to God like a ritual in a way like offering food or praying to God? Thank you so much. A ritual would be to do some kind of rite or ritual or ceremony or worship, thinking that this is going to help you get to enlightenment. But prayer isn't that. Prayer is like having a conversation with God. That's the way you can think about it. Because just like you have a conversation with other beings, you would, if you're interested in having a relationship with God, you would like to be able to have this conversation with God. And this is where it kind of gets started, that having this conversation with God, you can build that relationship. And now sometimes in prayer, even as you're in prayer and you're talking to God, you can have this conversation with this being. So it's not a rite, a ritual, or a ceremony. You can think of it like a conversation. Arvind is asking, does this God have a particular name or form? Different religions have different descriptions of this being. Some are gods, some are goddesses, and they have different names. What does Buddhism teach on this matter? Does the name and form we take to connect to God matter? No, there's just one supreme being in the world. There isn't a bunch of gods and goddesses running around. There isn't a bunch of deities running around. There's only one God that exists in the world. Back during the lifetime of the Buddha, they thought about multiple gods, but the Buddha ultimately talks most extensively about this great Brahma. And it wasn't until Jesus Christ came along 500 years later that Jesus Christ convinced the vast majority of the world that there is only one God. That was his ultimate objective during his lifetime. He taught some moral conduct and he taught some other things, but his ultimate objective was to convince the vast majority of the world that there was only one God, because up to that time, people believed in multiple gods. And that's why Jesus Christ had to perform so many miracles to convince people that he was the Son of God. And that's why he performed all those miracles, so that he could convince a lot of people that he was in fact the Son of God, and that he was helping people to understand that there was only one God. So no matter whether you refer to this being as Brahma or Allah or God or any number of ways that we might refer to this being, it's the same being. People are just thinking about this being in different ways and giving this being different names, but it's all the same being. And what I'm sharing with you here is how to think about this being in a way to either have a relationship with them or not have a relationship and still get to enlightenment. And it doesn't matter which name you use, that if you're acknowledging this supreme being of God, then you can have a relationship with this being. Chris is asking, is it possible to not understand what wisdom from God means for quite some time? I gain what I feel is wisdom in my sleep, but then when it goes away, I am no longer sure if it was wisdom from God or just conceit. Yes, sometimes you really need to think on the things that God's sharing with you, because it's deep, profound wisdom. It's not just the run-of-the-mill thing that you see in a book or somebody talk about. It's very deep and very profound. And sometimes it takes a lot of thinking and thought before you fully understand it. Julie is asking, did Buddha have a God or did he not need one? The Buddha talks about at a point in time in his teachings how he essentially looked out at the world as if he was God, the all-knowing and all-powerful being. He never talks about being a messenger of God or a prophet of God. He never talks about being guided by God, but he does talk about at one point kind of looking out at the world as if he is God. And that's something that a Buddha is able to do, is look out at the world in that way, but they're not actually God. So he talks about multiple gods because that's what people were discussing during his lifetime. Steve is saying, I remembered this lesson from the last session, and it is one of my favorites. It very much aligns with what I know to be true, just articulated better than I am able. Thanks, teacher. Yeah, you're welcome, Steve. Pleased to help you. Chris is saying, I experience miracles in my life too. That's how I know it's a real thing. Can you kindly share some of the miracles in your life that you experienced, Teacher David? Just looking at the time to see how much time we have, there's been countless miracles. I can explain one of the first ones, that I was here in my room back in 2018, and I was in my room standing up, and all of a sudden I laid down on my bed on my back, and there was this shooting energy from my feet all the way up through my body, this real intense, powerful energy, and it built up to pressure in my head, and then it just exploded out through my head. And then it was like all this burden had been lifted from the mind, and there was just all these tingling and pleasurable feelings and sensations all throughout my body. And I knew at that time that this feeling was impermanent, or I laid there and enjoyed it for a good 30 seconds to a minute, but I knew it was impermanent, so I wasn't interested in clinging to it. So I immediately tried to get up and kind of walk downstairs, but I was loopy. It was like my brain had exploded. My mind had exploded, and I was like kind of stumbling and making my way downstairs. And at this time, I was living a very closed-in life. I had all the curtains closed. It was very dark in my house. And I walked over to the curtains and I opened up the curtains as wide as I could and all the windows of the house, let all the light come in. And we have these two big sliding doors at the front of our house, and I opened those up and I went outside and I took a big breath of fresh air. And then I turned around and I went back to the couch where my computer was, and this butterfly flies into the house and it comes right up to my nose, and then it starts flying away. And as it's flying away and starting to go out of the house, I went and chased after it. And when I went to chase after it, it had disappeared. And I was like, whoa. And then I went over to my computer, and on my computer, it had a message that said, don't chase the butterfly, or don't follow the butterfly is what it said. Don't follow the butterfly. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then I was like, whoa. And then I went upstairs because my wife was up there, and I was interested in telling her what had just happened. And when I walked in, she was naked, getting ready to get into the shower. And up to that point, we had been still having sex. And when I walked in and I saw her, I was immediately not interested in seeing her body. It was like all the sensual desire had come out of my mind, and I wasn't interested in seeing her body. But what I did notice was, and I always knew this, is she's got a big butterfly tattoo on her hip. And up to that point, I'd been following my wife and really doing a lot of the things that she wanted me to do. I wasn't really following my own aspirations and my own interest. So the message here was, don't follow the butterfly. Don't follow your wife. You've got to be your own person, and you got to be able to stand up on your own 2 feet, right? And I didn't tell my wife about that miracle. I went in there and I saw her naked, and I saw the butterfly tattoo, and I just smiled and I just walked away, and just kind of absorbing what I had experienced. There was a time where I went to a temple, in that picture that I use of the Buddha that you guys see in this slide. It was at a temple, and I was sitting in a plastic chair, kind of like the ones that I have in the temple here. And when I first saw this picture for the first time, it was like 2 beams of light was coming out of the eyes of the Buddha, and it hit me in my eyes, and it knocked me back on the chair, and I was balanced on this chair. And it was just sitting there teeter-tottering on the back two legs of this chair. And I was not doing anything to do this. God was the one who was balancing the chair. And then boom, I came back down, right? And this is why I use this picture, because I know with God's confirmation that this is what Buddha looks like. And there were other things too. Like there was a time where I was getting ready to talk to somebody, and I was going to talk to somebody, and I was getting ready to say something unwholesome, and it was on the tip of my tongue, and God squeezed my lips, and he spun me around. He twisted my head, and I, kind of flipped around backwards, essentially because I was about to use wrong speech. One time when I was back in America in 2011, I was talking to a Thai massage audience. It was students who were learning Thai massage with me, and I said to them, because at this time, this is what I thought, I said, God does not exist. And when this happened, there was an earthquake. It was an immediate earthquake. And I'd never been in an earthquake before. This was the one and only earthquake that I'd ever been in my entire life. This is some of the miracles that had been performed by God. And there's been others as well, but these are some of the more profound ones. Okay, what is rapture? Rapture is like ultimate joy and ultimate bliss, where the mind kind of lets go. There's unconditioned joy in the mind. This is what's called rapture. So when I experience that release from this experience, I experience nothing but unconditioned joy at that point. Julia asked, why does God reach out to some people but not to others? It depends on how close to wholesomeness you are and whether or not you're open to his guidance in a relationship with him. So that's why I suggest to you that if you're going to pray, that you just let God know that, hey, I'm interested in having a relationship with you, or I don't know if you exist or not, but I'm open to your existence, or I know that you exist and I would like to have guidance from you. Whatever it is that you say, it's the right thing. There's no pre-prescribed thing that you should say. But if you make contact with this being and you let this being know that you're open to a relationship, gradually over time, this being knowing that, then you'll be able to receive guidance from this being. So if you are open to a relationship and you're headed towards wholesome things, this being's able to communicate with you more readily. Whereas if you're in the darkness, like if I was on the street corner selling heroin or shooting up heroin, this being's communication isn't getting through because my mind's too much in the darkness. I'm not able to communicate with this being, and this being's communication to me isn't really getting through, and I can't do something with it that'll be wholesome. So this is why the being God can interact with everybody and anybody, but he chooses wisely to interact with those beings that are open to his interaction and that'll do something with the wisdom that he shares. So this is why praying and saying, hey, I'm open to your guidance is so important. So this being has confirmation that you're open to his guidance, because he's not going to just show up in your life and push you around and say, do this and do that and do this and do that. That would be arrogance. That would be ego. This being's only going to come help you if you're requesting help. Arvind asks, other than the one God, is there a hierarchy of other beings in the cosmology of the universe? Heavenly beings, demons, bodhisattvas? The Buddha taught 5 realms: hell, animal realm, afflicted spirits, human realm, and heavenly realm. And then within each one of those realms, there's various beings. But you shouldn't see this as a hierarchy. All beings are equal, and you need to be able to see it that way. Bodhisattvas is not something that the Buddha taught. Even though people associate it with the teachings of the Buddha never actually taught this. It's not actually a real thing. Demons are part of the part of the hell realm. The demons and hell beings, that's what's in there. And then the cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha, you don't have to know this and you don't have to understand it. He goes into categorizing individual types of segments within the heavenly realm and inside the hell realm. He explains all these subcategories. Nowadays, we think about these realms in general: hell, animal, afflicted spirits, humans, and then heavenly beings. But just like within the animal realm, there's different types of animals, there's also different types of beings in the hell realm. And just like there's different ethnicities in the human realm, there's different types of beings in the heavenly realm or in the afflicted spirit realm. You can think of these realms in a general context, and that's what you really need to be able to get to enlightenment. You don't need to think about or remember or even learn the detailed cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha in order to get to enlightenment. Helena's asking, when the Buddha looked at the world as if he was God, how did the world look? You can see in his teachings, he talks about the world is burning, right? Like the fire. So even 2,500 years ago, the world was into all kinds of challenges and difficulties. The craving, anger, and ignorance, the world is burning. And he talks about this when he comes out of meditation one time. But when he looks out at the world as God, he just basically says that he could see like the all-knowing, all-powerful, as if he was that being essentially. Chris is saying, that's similar to experiences that I had. Thank you for sharing this. It helps me a lot. You're welcome, Chris. Arvin, dear teacher David, could you please provide us some references to look at in the Pali Canon or other authentic texts that talk about God, as we know time is short? I would look to volume 11. If you go through volume 11, and if you pull it up in the PDF version that I have, you could just put into the search God, and it'll just pull up all the different places there where God is referenced. So you'd be able to see that in that book. You could read that entire book if you like, but if you'd like to just look at discourses where the Buddha references God, that would be one of the books to look at. But I have some teachings sprinkled out throughout the other books of the book series where he's talking about God as well, but the largest concentration of them are in volume 11, which is titled Realms of Existence. Julie is asking, as all things are impermanent, does God also eventually disappear and get reborn? God doesn't get reborn, but God is impermanent. He has an extensively long lifespan, but this being is impermanent. He's not having a permanent existence because these natural laws are the natural laws. They're affecting all beings equally. But God's lifespan is so long that he has been in existence since the beginning of time, and if there's an end of time, he'll be all the way in existence through that as well. But remember, the Buddha doesn't teach that there is an end to this world in terms of the universe. We know that the earth itself is impermanent, and we know that humanity is impermanent. But whether the universe itself is impermanent or not, the Buddha didn't declare that as part of his teachings. All right, so it looks like that's all the questions. Wow, quite a lot of questions. I think out of all the classes that I've taught in this iteration of the group learning program, that was probably the most questions that I've seen. So you guys obviously must be interested in this topic and pleased to be able to share it with you guys. If you guys ever have any questions on this, you're always welcome to reach out and I'll help you. You can put this into the Facebook group. You can ask questions in class. You can send me private messages or you can schedule personal guidance. And remember, if you haven't read this chapter yet in the book, it's really helpful to read it because those same things that I walk through in today's class, I walk through it in a very logical way within the book. So you can read this as part of chapter 18, and the reading and the class together will help you to be able to understand this topic more deeply. Chapter 19 is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you're going to learn about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him on this journey to enlightenment. So I'll share that with you on next Sunday. Today at 3 p.m., I started a retreat here in Chiang Mai, which you guys are welcome to see the recording from that if you like. It's in YouTube and Facebook. And then Monday through Friday this week, I'm teaching a retreat here from 9 a.m. to 12:30. And then from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. You're going to see the live streams and you'll see the recordings in YouTube and Facebook. So you guys are welcome to attend this if you like, either live or through the recordings, where I'm teaching how to purify the mind. We're going into detail on each of the 10 fetters. There's other things that I'm teaching as well, but it's everything you need to get from the first stage of enlightenment to enlightenment itself. So you're always welcome to attend that either live or watch the recordings and then get help as you would like. Of course, on Wednesday, we're going to have class there as well. And then we have our Saturday Pali Canon and English study groups. Interesting enough, we're going to actually be restarting the group learning program here in about another 2 months. It seems like we just started it, but it was actually 5 months ago that we actually started this group learning program. So we're going to be restarting it in the middle of October, and we're going to be starting it from the very beginning. So if you'd like to take it again, or maybe if you've joined kind of like in the middle somewhere and you'd like to start from the beginning, we're going to be restarting it towards the middle of October. I think it's October 20th, if I remember correctly. But somewhere around there, we're going to be restarting from the very beginning. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn. And perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.